Warning: the following podcast is utter nonsense and may cause agoraphobia, kleptomania, insomnia, and oppositional defiance disorder. We are required by law to provide you with this disclaimer for hazardous materials.
Welcome back to the at-home edition of Hazardous Materials, last week's comics this week. My name, of course, Casey Johnson. With me, of course,
Gideon Gonzalez. And this week, we are talking about New Mutants, the graphic novel, issues 1 through 17, and Marvel Team Up 100, which are conveniently collected in the recent Marvel Epic collections, available at your local comic book store, hopefully, or otherwise online. They're great reads. I love the Epic Collection format. Highly recommend check them out.
Yeah, both you and I had the Epic Collection on this one. I had my old, if I could pull it out fast enough, my Marvel graphic novel kind of sitting around. So that's kind of what inspired me to do this. So yeah, let's get right into this. We're going to be looking at issues 1 through 17. We might talk about some issues in the future because honestly, my childhood is deeply rooted in this comic. The arcs and stories that they talk about have been with me since I was 11 years old. So,
and I'm a bit more of a newcomer to New Mutants. I didn't really get into them until a few years back when I got really into the X-Men during college. And I'd read these early issues before, but they didn't really click with me. And then I reread them for this, and I honestly have a much better appreciation of them now. They're great stuff. Although we'll get to it. There's a couple arcs in here that have me a little lukewarm on, but on the whole, there's some great comics. I mean, it's Claremont X-Men in the 80s, so if nothing else, it's a lot better than what else was coming out at the time.
And through the advent of social media, while Gideon and I were actually rereading these issues, because even though I had read them ad nauseum as a child and as a teen, even as an adult, I hadn't really looked at them in the past, I don't know, decade or so. So there was actually a couple issues I didn't even remember. But through the advent of social media, it's crazy, but you can actually reach out to creators of stuff far easier than you could back when these books were first coming out.
You don't have to stand 5 hours in line to ask Chris Claremont one question.
No, not at all. I was while I was reading the issues, I went on Facebook and I asked Bob McLeod, who's one of the co-creators of this and the artist of like the first 4 issues, and then the inker of like the next maybe 6 issues, I think. Hey, what were you thinking while you were doing this? You know, what was the process? Why'd you lose this character and stuff like that? And I got answers liquidy quick, and without realizing what I had done, while I was talking to him on Facebook about it, he name drops Chris Claremont. Say, hey, Chris, what were you thinking about this? And boom, Chris Claremont responds to my stuff. I'm like, what is this world? What a time
to be alive.
I got the 2 guys that created this stuff as a child casually talking to me about what their thought process was when they made this book. So that was great. So it's been a New Mutants week for me. But let's get right down to this and kind of give you some basics of what we're going to be talking about here. New Mutants was created in the mid-'80s, kind of as a way to engage younger viewers or younger readers, kind of give them their own team. The team wasn't going to be an X-Men of any real sort. That's the reason why they're not called the X whatever or X-Men Young Class. They were just called the New Mutants, and it was going to focus on them being kids. You know, I mean, the first few issues are really just about them being people. Yeah. And having powers. They're not fighting crimes. They're not doing anything. Yeah, of course, they have reasons for using their powers, but
they get attacked by Sentinels pretty early on. But yeah, much less of the X-Men's like being an advocate for mutants and much more of kids living their lives.
So this moment happened during a time when the X-Men had been kidnapped by what they call the Sleazoids, or
the Brood.
the Brood,
Yes.
which are kind of like these weird H.R. Geiger-esque alien things which can possess bodies and kind of take them over.
They're xenomorphs on a different palette.
Yeah. So basically, they'll put something in you, but instead of like chest bursting, they'll take over your genetic material and rewrite themselves, making you go from human to one of them, but retaining all of your genetic bonuses. So, but we'll get into that more reason why we're bringing that up. But at the point, the Xavier Mansion is completely empty, and we're basically going to go and get us some new students. So that's really where New Mutants graphic, or the Marvel graphic novel number 4, which at the time when this came out was only $4.95.
A bargain.
A vast bargain, because this was back when comics were still using newsprint. And so this was using brand new. I don't know if you can really see this because I'm kind of blurred out. Yeah, you really can't. But it's using a higher level of paper. At the time, I think they called this Baxter paper, and the colors are much more brighter. Everything was not cleaner, and as you could tell, the format of the book was larger.
Yeah, it's on a magazine cut versus a standard comic cut. And one thing I thought was interesting, because one of my first big notes when I was diving into the ongoing series was, wow, the coloring is much better in the graphic novel. It's still Glyn Wine doing the coloring, but just with a more painted or colored pencil style versus the more like kind of matte colors you see in the ongoing series. Yeah, and that kind of goes into when you're on a 1 month crunch deadline versus when you're producing the term graphic novel as it was originally intended.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna send up a little picture here. This is just an example of what a comic page looked like during the time that this came out, and as you can see, the paper is really substandard compared to what comics are printed on these days. People always wonder, well, how the hell could comics be 35 cents and 50 cents and $1 back in the day? Because they were printed on newsprint, this pulp paper that they just threw this wet wad of crap and just ironed out paper out of, and hoped to God that the colors that they were going to throw on it would stick.
I'm an advocate for newsprint in comics, especially when you're reprinting comics of that time period and not adjusting the colors to like match up with your new paper, because so many decisions were made on like what the final product would look like on newsprint. And that's something you lose a lot when you're transferring newsprint issues to glossy paper of today. I think one of the kind of best examples is DC's Hellblazer reprints use a paper closer to newsprint than nicer paper, and so they look a bit more close to what the original intent was. Versus like we see a lot of Silver Age reprints from Marvel, you get a much more I'm not sure the exact term I would go for. I guess a little too sharp of a reproduction when it's the original intention is supposed to be a bit muddier.
Yeah, I mean, the way the paper is being done with comic books has always been a guiding force, even creatively. I mean, the substandard paper that we were using in the 60s is the very reason why Hulk is green. Yeah. Because green and purple saturates paper easier, quicker, and you can distribute more of them. The first issue of Hulk, he was gray. Didn't work out that well. It took them forever to get them to process down to get him to be gray. And he's like, you know what, screw it. We're going to second issue. We're turning him green. We're not even going to explain it. They would later, of course, find a reason story-wise why he switched from gray to green. It had a lot.
Peter David spent a good 100 issues on the green-gray discrepancy.
Yeah, if you ever want to find out what the hell we're talking about, go Google Hulk and Joe Fix-It, and you'll see a lot of explanation about it.
Might be a good future topic for us to discuss on the show, because I am a huge Peter David Hulk fan.
I'm a huge Peter David fan.
X-Factor, Young Justice, Aquaman. Hits keep coming.
Even to some degree, Spider-Man 2099, except of course that white uniform crap. I hated it. It is,
let's say, the best 2099. Well, Ellis on Doom 2099 is pretty damn good.
Yeah, it was.
Let's say the most consistent 2099 book, because David's on the book, I think, for the entirety of its original run and all of its modern runs.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick rundown on what the characters are going to be dealing with here. Basically, got your basic 5. Marvel likes 5s when it comes to mutant teams and starting them out, and that's what we're dealing with here. You've got Wolfsbane, the Scottish girl who can turn herself into a wolf. She's the youngest member. You got Danny Moonstar, who can psionically pull fear and other illusions out of people's heads. You got Sam Guthrie, who can fly with a force field around him to kind of emulate a human cannonball.
And he's nigh invulnerable when blasting.
He's nigh invulnerable when he's blasting.
Which is, at the very least,
flies into things.
Some variation of that phrase shows up every issue for at least 10. I stopped keeping track after 10, but...
I've got a buddy of mine who loves Cannonball, and every time we talk about it, he drops into a Kentucky accent and goes, "But I'm not invulnerable when I'm blasted."
His other secondary mutation is that he can pick up some local channels on those big old ears of his.
Oh, God, he's got some Kentucky fried ears. So these people have very, very distinctive physical characteristics that you can pretty much even spot who they are just by silhouettes. Moving on, we got Sunspot, Roberto da Costa from Brazil, who absorbs solar energy and converts it into strength. And he kind of has this weird look where he basically absorbs light around him, so he becomes like this null blackness. It's a really cool look. And then I guess to top it off, Marvel pulled an extra character that just recently popped in a Marvel team up, which is this Vietnamese girl named Karma, who could possess people psionically. And they brought her in to kind of round off the 5 members you're going to be getting in this issue.
I feel like that was definitely planned, though, because Claremont was on Marvel team up at the time. And if there's one thing that by this point Claremont's very good at, it is doing long-term seeding for his stories. And this will come up with Karma as well later in the main series. But I feel like he definitely threw her in team up as kind of a preview of what he had planned for New Mutants.
And to back up what you're saying, we do see some very long-term seeding of storylines, because even though the character of Magic is not one of the first members of this team, and she's still considered one of the core members, anytime anybody's talking about New Mutants, they're going to talk about Magic. When you're looking at the trailer for the New Mutants movie that has yet to come out, the flashiest part about it is Magic. I thought she came in 15. I thought that she came in issue 15, and that's when she started. But turns out she was there issue 1 as a backup story.
Yeah, she's there with Moira McTaggart. And what I thought was really interesting was that Legion is mentioned. Moira and Magic go and visit Gabrielle Haller, and she mentions that she and Charles have a son who has some form of mental disability. They just refer to him as autistic in the first issue, but obviously that's kind of just a rough idea of what they had planned for Legion. That kind of just a neurodivergent son of Charles Xavier, before they really go into like the full like idea of what they had for the character. And that was very surprising to me, because I've always known in my head, like, yeah, Legion's first cameo is 24, first full appearance is 25, wrap up of that arc is 26. But no, like, he's there from the beginning of the book.
Yeah, it's interesting to point out that this is for me personally, this was my first exposure to even the word autism, and you wouldn't see it really in popular media again for decades.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because my first exposure to the concept was in a Generation X issue years later, when they're talking about Monet and Beast mentions it, and they kind of have like a very special episode issue about that.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, it's a bit later into the run. I don't think it's when Lobdell and Bocello are on the book. I think it might be when Larry Hama's on it, but I'm not 100% sure. But man, yeah, there's a whole issue about
Larry Hama.
Let's say his Gen X work isn't his strongest work, but I have a ton of nostalgia for it, so I'll give it a pass. But yeah, that issue's pretty solid.
Just a little footnote. Larry Hama pretty much single-handedly created G.I. Joe.
If you like G.I. Joe, you like Larry Hama's contribution to the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, he single-handedly wrote every single G.I. Joe Marvel issue from issue 1 until the very last issue. And then he even wrote the continuation that continued outside of Marvel. And
over at IDW.
And they let him continue his storyline with it.
And keep the numbering.
I know. Oh my God. It was
and I found out recently, I didn't realize this, that Larry Hama was also an artist, because one of his first projects is doing the Marvel Premiere Iron Fist stories. He doesn't do the first one, but from 15 onward, he does the art on those.
Yeah, and on top of that, we're going to finish this little side note. He actually has his own G.I. Joe figure. Tunnel Rat is based off of him. Larry
Hama is really, really rad. Well worth doing some diving into his career in and out of comics.
But getting back into New Mutants, got a little distracted there. We don't really see what happens with Legion up until what is it? Was it New Mutants Annual number 2?
It's New Mutants number 24. Yeah,
it was 24. Yeah. Because I know Sienkiewicz drew him, and it was because he had that crazy spike hair.
And he really cool visual stuff with him.
And while maybe a lot of people really known about the whole New Mutants title, everyone knows the X-Men, they know Avengers. They might know New Mutants because, of course, the movie. But the characters themselves have been in various forms of X-Men media here and there. You'll find the characters popping up as kind of a sub-team in X-Men Evolution, which we can see their character designs here. They even had their own unique costumes, which were made to contrast what the X-Men uniforms were looking like at the time. A couple of the characters showed up in Days of Futures Past. Kind of like a proto version of Sunspot was used in Days, which kind of looked more like Human Torch than really Sunspot, but that was him.
Yeah, also, it's something.
Yeah, Warpath or T-Bird was in that.
Yeah.
And he's very intrinsically tied to the New Mutant storyline, which we'll get into a little bit later in this video. And of course, they've also popped up in, like, was it was it Dark Phoenix? No, I'm just going to bring up the New Mutants. The New Mutants movie has everybody that we're talking about except Karma, which they replaced her with Magic. I get why they did it. They wanted to keep the cast small. And honestly, Magic is a very dynamic looking character that would look great on the screen. And the screen grabs I've seen of this, because Amazon kind of screwed up and kind of dropped the hint that they've already got a video on demand file of this and they haven't released it yet. So screen grabs of a video instead of print magazines have been showing up, and one of them is Magic facing off against one of the baddies of this movie, which I'm not going to get too deeply into, but it looks great. Magic's ability is that she could teleport, but she's also got this crazy demonic armor thing, and she's got something called the Soul Sword, which looks really cool. If you're watching the trailer, she's the one that says, I killed like 13 men one by one. That's Magic. An interesting thing to note here is when Magic does finally show up, even though we're kind of used to the Soul Sword that she's used looking like this big broadsword with this massive hilt and this large handle. The Soul Sword that she uses in the New Mutants looks like a lightsaber, like a white lightsaber.
Which is, it's a bit closer to her earlier appearances. Like the Buster Sword's a Chris Bichello invention from like 2013, which is when like the character really skyrocketed in popularity this past decade. And I feel like a lot of it was Bichello's take on it with the big old sword. So this is kind of cool seeing a more traditional look for the Soul Sword, where it looks a bit more reasonable and something that a human being could actually wield and not a surfboard on a stick.
So we've reread the first 17 issues of this, now stopping just short of New Mutants 18, which actually starts a very iconic story called the Demon Bear Saga.
Which will be our next episode, diving into the Bill Sienkiewicz run on the title, which is my favorite era of the book.
Yeah, and from what I understand is also the main focus of the New Mutants movie, which we'll get into. When I first heard about the New Mutants movie, I was like, okay, cool. Then I saw the trailer, I was like, that looks like crap. I'm not interested in that at all.
Exact opposite reaction for me. I was like, oh, cool. It's the New Mutant stuff that I like.
But the thing is, it felt like it was low key. Like it was, they were trying to make a mutant movie, but they were trying to do it on the lowest budget possible. Like all the action you were going to see was them in this haunted house, and that was it.
Which, as a Blumhouse aficionado, I respect the hustle.
But then as the other trailers came out, and obviously more finished special effects came out, I realized this movie is going to be a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be.
You can see Lockheed breathing fire on the Demon Bear. I'm hyped.
Yeah, I didn't realize that they were going to go full bore on these characters and actually be completely true to their power sets. And
will Cannonball be 9 vulnerable when blasting?
I don't know.
He doesn't say it once. I'm suing for these years of expectation. Been what, 2-3 years since the trailer dropped? I demand that he be 9 vulnerable when blasting.
I actually think that even though people expect Marvel to drop this movie and be done with it because it is part of the old 20th Century Fox X-Men universe, therefore the idea of it having a sequel is next to non-existent. This is basically the footnote of the Singer era, and then that's it. But the more things I hear about it and the more I've seen about it makes me wonder that Marvel may actually know what they've got and that they actually might do something with it, because there's money to be made with cheap horror. There's money to be made with superhero movies. Is there mega money to be made if proper marketing and distribution is done on a movie that does both? Who knows?
I really hope so, as someone who loves cheap horror and superhero movies.
Now, I have had to eat my hat seeing the other trailers and going, oh, that movie actually might be fucking crazy. I might be really stoked about this and not as disappointed as I was when I saw the first trailer. And I'm thinking that Marvel is sitting there thinking, we probably really should put this in the theaters. And if it does well, do we make a sequel? Because a sequel needs to get made. I mean, the guys that's directing and writing it said, hey, listen, if we were going to get a sequel, we were going to bring Warlock in, we're going to bring Karma in. And God, what was the villain?
Warlock?
Was actually,
I know they mentioned Bobby's dad as a potential villain, which I was a little unsure of because I already wasn't crazy about their casting of Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we'll get into that as we talk about the book itself.
I forget there were the villain of the second movie was actually going to be one of the future members, and I can't remember who it was.
Warlock had been thrown about as the potential for the first movie. I remember they talked about Bobby's dad being in the second movie as well, and kind of playing those like Warlock and his dad, the Magus, versus Bobby's relationship with his own father. Which there's good story potential there. It's just, man, we're gonna dive into the problems I have with the casting of Roberto.
It's probably the exact same problems that I've had and that I've discussed in our previous episodes.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it.
Yeah, is the fact that Roberto is a very dark-skinned Portuguese boy.
He is Afro-Latino.
Very.
Gets into the problem of casting and only seeing one aspect of a character and being like, oh, he's Brazilian, we'll just cast a Brazilian actor. And like, well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Like, it's a huge part of his character that he is a black man in Brazil, which has a pretty big racism problem. His introduction in New Mutants, he is faced with racial prejudice. His dad's entire arc is like precipitated on him rising up from his position. Like when a man of his skin color faces all sorts of adversity.
And Berto looks a particular way.
Yeah.
He just does. And this is not the first time or only time that our boy Berto has had some inadvertent whitewashing. Marvel has dropped the ball several times with its colorists and its artists, just being absolutely lazy about dealing with Roberto and basically just turning him white. There was a series of Avengers comics where Roberto was leading a team. I think it was the USA Avengers or something like that.
Yeah, New Avengers and USA Avengers, which are great books, but it's really frustrating that Berto is white in them.
He's just a white man with black hair and a white stripe, and it's not him. And it feels like the Marvel's done this a lot with him, and it was only up until recently with Hawks and Pox that we've got our classic Roberto. He's talking the way he used to. He looks the way he does consistently. He acts the way he used to. It feels like we've lost our friend for a long time, and he's finally home. That's what it feels like to me.
On a similar kind of branch from that, I'm a huge Connor Hawke fan. He was Oliver Queen's son, who is Black and Korean. And he was like, when I started reading comics, he was Green Arrow at the time. And I was like, yeah, cool. This guy's great. I love him. He's Green Arrow. And after Oliver Queen came back, colorists frequently forgot that he is not just a carbon copy of Oliver Queen. And throughout the 2000s, he is frequently colored as like white. It
was my understanding that really Connor Hawke was a blonde white kid because of what you're talking about.
Yeah, if you go back into when he was the lead Green Arrow, like they make an effort to draw him differently and color him differently. And it's brought up numerous times within the book. It's a massive plot point several times. And it's just one of those things of like, how do you miss that? How does an editor miss that primarily? I can understand like a colorist is, you're not going out doing your job. You don't have to be familiar with every single character. But an editor should know that and should catch that because it's an incredibly important facet of a character.
Yeah, there are times when I've wondered about Marvel's editorial process when it comes to colorists. And I've talked to you about this before. What I like to basically lazy art. You know, a guy will say, well, okay, I'm giving you the art, but I'm not going to bother drawing the costumes on it. I'm not going to bother giving you any notes about it. And leaving the colorist basically to paint costumes on people. And you don't see anything in an editorial doing anything to fix that. Same thing goes for this mercurial race jumping of several different characters. If you're not white, you're going to get whitewashed at Marvel or even DC at least once.
And when you get away with it once, that's when the floodgates open, because then it's just like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It can just keep happening. And that eventually leads to like Connor or Roberto just being standardly colored as white.
Yeah. This happens to Jubilee constantly. Whether it's just the fact that maybe an artist just doesn't know how to draw an Asian person's face, or to even vaguely hint at the fact that they might be Asian, or whatever. But Jubilee has looked like a white girl for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's a frustrating aspect. And I understand that like same face comes up as a problem for a lot of artists, and that probably plays into it. I mean, deadline crunch is a thing, but it's still kind of one of the most basic things in depicting a character. Like,
this is one of the things. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go on.
I was going to say, this is one of the reasons why I truly love Bob McLeod's art, is because people look like where they're coming from. And you look at Karma, who is French Vietnamese, and there's no doubt at all that she's Vietnamese.
Yeah, McLeod does a great job of capturing all of the characters, and really you can see that he had a lot of input in the creation of them from the ground up. Like, they all look like individuals. None of them, like, you can tell them all apart from like a good distance. It's just really good character design. And Sal Buscema and Tom Mandrake do a good job of carrying on with that as well when they take over the book.
which I was really surprised about because I've seen a lot of other Sal's work. Because if I'm not mistaken, he did the first few issues of Rom's Space Knight.
I think you're right. I know Ditko took over the book eventually, but Sal Buscema is all over the Marvel Universe. Like him and John were just doing everything. Yeah, I mostly know him from Spectacular Spider-Man he did with J.M. DeMatteis in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, like around the time Harry Osborn died. And his work is much more angular then. That was one of the big things that shocked me seeing his name on these. He does a really good job of blending his style with Bob McLeod's, which is much more rounded and organic. Sal's later work especially is much more sharp edges on characters.
Yeah, less definition on facial features because Bob's whole thing is if you see somebody's face, it's going to be consistent. You got Rain's face is a particular way. Shan's face is a particular way. They've all got recognizable facial features. And when the other artists start picking up, it's clear that they want to continue what's making New Mutants at the time, which is these recognizable characters, not just people with powers shot from a distance, and we just see their powers fly around and they have a costume and that's it. A lot of artists sometimes, unfortunately, do that. These characters lose who they are and they just become a supernatural element of the book. Okay, I need this character to fly around and cause things on fire and then talk about how funny it is. It's very rare that you actually have characters in a comic that are close up, big picture on just them being normal.
Yeah, there's a lot of just the kids hanging out being kids, which I really appreciate. I'm a big fan of that kind. I was a big fan of that kind of stuff in Claremont's X-Men, which obviously is a massive, massive influence on this book because it essentially came down to Jim Shooter was going to commission a spinoff of X-Men, whether Claremont was on board or not. And so Chris said, well, might as well be me. I don't want to see a crappy take on my book. And you really...
I'm sorry, I had to interrupt you there.
Go ahead. No, you go on.
This is the second time I've interrupted you. I don't want to interrupt your story. But Bob McLeod's been on Facebook recently posting his pencils of the first few issues and talking about his feelings about them. And he said that one of his favorite pages to write was the very first picture of the very first issue, which is just all the kids dressed like kids. One of them sitting on a toilet, not going to the toilet, but just sitting on the toilet and watching something. And they're just styling Shan's hair. That's it.
Yeah, it's a great page.
It's a really great page.
You get so much of it.
Tight outfits.
Yeah, you get so much information just from body language, facial expressions, how the characters are talking to each other. It's this kind of effortless. Well, I don't want to say effortless because obviously a lot of craft and care put into it, but it just communicates so much about who these characters are right off the bat without having to go into one-page origins for every character. It's well, you get the gist of it already. You can pick up what their deal is throughout the rest of the issue, but you know them as people first, which I think is a really important, interesting take in superheroes.
Okay, so now that we've talked about the characters themselves, we kind of talked about our pros and cons as far as Marvel's usage of these characters. Let's talk a little bit about the story arcs going into the first year for New Mutants. The first one, obviously, is the kids just getting used to themselves. A lot of them dealing with the fact that their powers are really uncontrollable. You got Sam, who can fly, but he can only fly in straight lines because he can't seem to make a turn. You've got Moonstar, who pulls these vivid, fearful illusions out of people's heads, but she has no control about when it happens. So that page we were talking to you about where all the kids are hanging out and they're just shampooing Shan's hair, trying to give her a new hairstyle. Out of nowhere, Moonstar pulls this horrifying memory out of Shan's head of her, of this event that happened to her with her family. And it just, the mood just sinks immediately within 2 pages.
Yeah. One of my kind of things that jumped out at me doing this read of these books is they don't pull any punches with Shan's backstory. It's it is as explicit as they can be in a early 1980s Marvel comic. But I was very shocked. I assumed that her kind of backstory came a bit later in the book, but it's right there in her first appearance in Marvel Team Up 100 and in Marvel graphic novel number 4. Say for readers who may not know, Shan's backstory is, well, emigrating from Vietnam, her and her mother are essentially captured by pirates, and the male members of her family are murdered and the women are sexually assaulted. And they deal with that right off the page. Like, they don't say it explicitly, but it is all but there in text. And I just found that was incredibly shocking for a comic of this time period that they would be so blunt about this topic. And it really informs a lot of Shan's character going forward, and we'll talk a bit more about my disappointments with their handling of Shan in the book. But yeah, she's a 3-dimensional character right off the bat. They deal with this trauma as a central part of her character, and they don't pull any punches with it. It's there. The rest of the kids are horrified by what Danny pulls out, and that Shan and Danny have to deal with that.
Yeah, and it's not just a casual thing. It's just thrown away at the next page, because right after Danny pulls this memory out, Shan attacks her, and they have to tear her off of her. And usually sometimes you'll see this kind of conflict in comic books and stuff like that. And whenever something like that happens, everybody apologizes and within an issue, it's all gone. There wasn't an apology with this one. This lingered in the air.
It informs their relationship for the rest of the series going forward.
Yeah, so much, in fact, that when Danny went to the danger room to try to do this exercise, she felt that Shan may try to kill her. And true to power, obviously that didn't happen, but somebody did try to kill her. Somebody in the danger room jacked all the stuff up to 100 and put it on X-Men difficulty, and then it almost murdered her. And she's going through the ideas like, oh my God, I've wronged Shan so much. Maybe she's the one that tried to kill me, and they have to iron that detail out.
And we have at this point in the plot, we have a few potential suspects to who did that. In the Marvel graphic novel, the villain of the book is Alexander Pierce, leader of the Reavers. And I think, is this the first appearance of the Reavers as augmented cyborgs after Wolverine diced them? Because I don't remember them popping up until the Australia stuff.
No, the Reavers came back. Actually,
I guess it was it was that issue with Wolverine in the snow. The Barry Windsor Smith one.
You are right. Cole, Macon, and Reese. Those are the 3 Hellfire. I remember their names. Cole, Macon, and Reese were the 3 Hellfire guards that Wolverine tore through
in Dark Phoenix.
When he got out of the sewers, they lived. And in the Marvel graphic novel number 4, you're right. This is their first appearance since that.
As Reavers,
Yeah, and they're showcased as having reverse colors than the other Hellfire agents. They're mostly red outfits with blue belts instead of blue outfits with red belts. Hellfire guards looked really gimp-ish back then with their face masks and stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much what happens. They show up in this, and they're part of the whole backstory because they bring in Sam into the Hellfire Club through a variety of deceptions.
And the Hellfire Club is a persistent villain throughout this run. They're the overarching villains of it, because after Alexander Pierce gets his ass handed to him by a bunch of kids, Sebastian Shaw is waiting in the wings like, new mutants, you say?
I should correct you. It's Donald Pierce.
Sorry.
Because Alexander Pierce is a SHIELD agent.
You're right. You got me. I got my Pierces mixed up.
Yeah. Donald Pierce is a cyborg. Basically, the higher-ups of the Hellfire Club are all mutants, except Donald Pierce, which is really strange because he's not a mutant. He's very anti-mutant, and he's a heavy cyborg. Yet this is the company he keeps.
You might remember the name from Logan. He is the main Reaver there, and he has the cool robot hand that does the little.
That's Donald Pierce. That's the
a very
20th
different
Century
take on
Fox.
him, but very well done.
Actually, a much more even-keeled version of him is in Logan, because man, the Donald Pierce that's in the MCU is a nutball.
Yeah, traditional Pierce is pretty nuts. You could have gathered that from him constantly experimenting cybernetics on people and making deals with techno-organic monsters from beyond the stars, but
yeah, at one point he's just pretty much just a head.
Yeah.
At this point.
Him and what's his name? Angel's roommate.
Oh, Cameron Hodge.
Love that dude.
Oh wow, man! Let me tell you that the arc when Cameron Hodge got revealed to be the villain blew my mind.
I knew it was coming because before I read those X Factor issues, I read Extinction Agenda, but man, I can see that being an absolutely wild plot twist at the time.
The first 12 issues of X Factor, which was Marvel's effort to bring the first 5 X-Men back and have their own title right after they revealed that Jean Grey did not actually die as Dark Phoenix and that she was actually off somewhere else and Dark Phoenix was like some weird cosmic clone of her. Anyway, whatever. They brought back Jean Grey and said, well, we want to make this book. So they made X Factor. And X Factor's whole shtick was they were going to hide in plain view as mutant eliminators and hunters. And the person that was helping them do this whole thing, basically their lawyer kind of go guy, they're basically their biggest ally is Cameron Hodge, who later becomes, of course, the cyborg nutjob that he is.
So in these first few issues, you kind of get the rising sense that something's not right with Charles Xavier. And this is tying directly into the events of the Brood saga that was going on over on X-Men at the same time. So interwound to the point that X-Men 167, the culmination of that, is included in the New Mutants Epic Collection. And it jumps right off from the prior New Mutants issue, which I think is 3 or 4, which ends with the kids being like, let's watch some Magnum PI, to them watching Magnum PI in X-Men.
Oh my God. Fun. Let's talk about how often Magnum PI is brought up in the New
Berto loves Magnum PI, and I really want him to show up in the current books with a stash and a Hawaiian shirt over his costume. Because it comes up 3 times in these first 17 issues.
And now that Magnum PI is actually back on the air with a different character, I want Berto to talk about that. I want him to bring up the non-Celic Magnum.
Bam, 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 bam. Damn, now I'm gonna have the Magnum PI thing stuck in my head.
You know, the funny thing, and this series is heavily dated. You know, sometimes Marvel does this with books. They'll set something specifically in the year it's being set. Other times they'll leave it completely nebulous. Like if you're watching or if you're reading Spider-Man in the 70s and 80s, you're not going to know it's in the 70s or 80s unless you look at the quality of the paper, or if you know your way around the artists and you can tell it's just going to be Spider-Man. Not so with this. At one time, the kids are walking out of a theater talking about the fact they just saw E.T. They're watching Magnum PI. They go to Brazil, and the kids ask them if they want a boogie.
Which honestly, I prefer it when books are so of a time, because no matter what you do with it, eventually your book is going to be a period piece, you know? Mm-hmm. Like I show people like, oh, it's so ridiculous that the Spider-Man comic mentions characters having limited minutes on their cell phone. And I'm like, well, that's just what the reality was at the time. Yeah. And even though you may desperately want like a sliding timeline to work perfectly, it never will. And like comics are ultimately time capsules of the time they were printed in. And I don't know, I just get a little frustrated when people want them to be completely timeless, because I feel like that would just strip them of so much personality.
Yeah, it's an unwritten rule that with comic books, your continuity is only as good as the broad strokes it creates. The fine details are always going to just be erased, and you just have to accept that. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you go with that fact, you'll be fine. Don't overthink it.
Let's say it's just a show. You really should just relax.
Exactly. Don't overthink the big, thick cell phones that Peter Parker was using in his 20s and the micro cell phones that he's now using in his 30s.
But yeah, you get like a nice little throwdown between the X-Men and the Mutants, and that's them coming back and taking that Brood Queen out of old Chucky Z.
And you find out that the entire reason for the New Mutants collected and being created is the Brood wanted good genetic material for its queens.
They wanted an army of super queens.
They were going to implant all of the kids with queens. And so the whole creation of New Mutants had nothing to do with Chuck wanting to make a new team. It was all about them wanting genetic material.
And then Charles is like, although it was made in evil intentions, it's still a good idea. So I'm going to keep these kids around.
That's exactly what happens. It's like, hey, listen, I'm really sorry. I know I did try to kill you, which it turns out that Xavier is the one that tried to kill Danny in the danger room and all that. For whatever reason, I guess they decided that she just wasn't good enough for what they were trying to do. So he turns into his Brood. The X-Men get involved. They beat the crap out of him. Their alien allies fix him. So now Xavier's back. He's not Brood infested, and he can walk. So we've got our first example of walking Xavier, which we will see at least 5 or 6 more times over the next 20, 30 years.
They really go back and forth on if he can walk or not.
And this was the first time. This is the first time we got walking Xavier.
And the issues after that, this is when Sal Buscema and Tom Mandrake take over. Actually, at this point, it's Sal Buscema and Bob McLeod on inks. After McLeod leaves the book, Tom Mandrake takes over inks. But this is another example of tying directly into the X-Men at the time, because here we get Silver Samurai and Viper, aka Madam Hydra, teamed up before they would show up to ruin Wolverine's big day in the X-Men book. And they even make a point of that, where Silver Samurai is frustrated by the events of the Wolverine mini, and Viper's like, well, maybe after this job we can go mess up with this Logan guy and his wife Mariko.
The epic first Wolverine miniseries ever done by the then legendary Frank Miller. I say the then.
It is, let's say, as troubling a figure as I find Frank Miller now, that him and Claremont on that Wolverine mini is one of the highlights of Claremont's run on X-Men, which is a very competitive field, and also just of Miller's 80s output, because you're stacking that up against Daredevil Born Again, which I consider one of the greatest comics ever written. And oh man, Dave Mazzucchelli's art on that book, phenomenal.
Frank Miller back then is basically
he was shooting 100 in the 80s.
I was going to say he's Jordan with the Bulls at the time. Not today, which is basically Jordan with the Wizards.
Oh, my God. Yeah, honestly, Jordan's a great comparison. Just absolutely at the top of his game at the period. And then afterwards, you're like, this guy might not be that great. Although, again, you cannot take away the man's achievements in his prime, because
absolutely
God Almighty. Revolutionary stuff.
Easily, if we were to do a top 10 individual issues of all time, which we probably should at one point, because that last special we did was really cool. Easily in my top 5 would be Daredevil 181, Frank Miller drawing the death of Elektra by Bullseye.
And for me, Daredevil 191, the aftermath of that issue, where it's Daredevil playing Russian roulette with Bullseye. That's
another
for me.
Another really great issue. Frank Miller was just awesome, and 181 was. I'm not going to get off on a tangent about why 181 is awesome. It just is. And really when you read it, you're like, "Holy crap! The Punisher is in this."
Foggy Nelson's there.
Everybody's in this freaking book. How the hell did this happen?
Getting back to New Mutants,
back to where
ostensibly the bigger point of this arc is it's a team up with the New Mutants with Team America, who are a group of Evel Knievel knockoff mutants who ride around on motorcycles and were there to sell toys.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get a brief vignette on what we're talking about here. Back in the 80s, there was a series of toys called Team America, and they all had like red, white, and blue kind of bodysuits.
Not to be confused with the Trey Parker and Matt Stone Team America World Police.
This happened decades before the whole World Police thing that they were doing. But they ran for 12 issues. And during those 12 issues, they had Marvel guest stars, including Ghost Rider, obviously. If you're going to have a bunch of motorcycle riding heroes, you're going to have Ghost Rider, and they were smart enough to include him in their 10th issue. As a kid, I bought every single one of these issues. I was a Team America fan. I knew all about Team America. So when they popped up in the New Mutants, my next new book, I was like, they're mutants? So that's what it turned out to be. So Team America's, their shtick was, their mystery was, when stuff got crazy, a black-clad rider of superhuman strength and agility would come in and basically kick everything's ass. And the whole mystery was, who is this guy? Who's the Marauder or the Dark Rider? He had a lot of different names. And throughout the entire 12-issue run, you never really find out what's going on with that. You know, this guy just comes out of nowhere, and people are wondering, well, maybe it's one of the members of Team America, and we got to pay attention to which one, who's not here at the time when the Marauder shows up. And then you find out that all three of the members, four really, members of Team America were experimented on with their parents, and they became mutants. And their mutant power is basically a gestalt of their abilities into one person. So all four of these guys will throw all their physical and mental attributes into one of them, and he will become the Dark Rider. That's his thing. So, but that was their explanation for why the Marauder would show up no matter who was with them, because they would just pick the one guy that wasn't in the storyline or the story frame. It's like, okay, well, it's Are You Ready is the Marauder right now, or it's Cowboy is the Marauder, or Lobo. I know their names, Gideon. I know the names of these guys.
Bananas.
So they became the B-roll in New Mutants for about 3 issues, as Xavier's trying to help them focus on their mutant abilities and try to control the Marauder and basically bring him out on purpose instead of him just becoming, like a Hulk thing. Everybody freaks out and he shows up.
And this is where one of my biggest issue with this run comes from, is at the end of this arc, Karma's gone.
Yeah, flat out.
She is seemingly dead, and the team deals with that for the remaining issues up until, she doesn't come back for a good 2 years of the book.
Yeah,
I found that really frustrating with how much work they put into developing Karma and getting you attached to Karma, especially her as a leader figure for the kids. And I see, narratively, why you would want to kind of throw the remaining New Mutants out into the woods without their oldest teammate and most level-headed. But I don't know. It's just really frustrating. I like Karma a lot. I got really attached to her rereading these issues, and I was really excited to see more of her. And then it's just like, oh, yeah, you don't get to see Karma again until the end of Sienkiewicz's run, which we're a long ways off from that.
And it was a Claremont idea. He was basically going to do it. And obviously, Claremont had an idea of what he wanted to do with this. But by the time it was resolved, he was long gone. So it was left to, I believe, Louise Simonson.
I think Claremont's still on the book when he brings her back. I think because she shows back up at the end of him and Sienkiewicz's run. He's still on the book for a little bit after that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it is Louise Simonson doing a lot of the heavy lifting behind her return, just because Simonson's on that book for much longer than Claremont was.
I thought that maybe that was the case, because this goes back to that Facebook thing. They were talking about Karma and the fact that he says, by the time that she's back, Wheezy, as he refers to her, is on the book. And I've read my fair share of comic books to know that when artists are referring to a person by the name of Wheezy, that's Louise Simonson. So that's what made me believe that she handled Karma's return in issue 31.
Yeah, it's a ways, which is the last issue collected in the second Epic collection.
Yeah,
which I'm as we're talking, I'm starting to think this might be a 3-part like discussion of New Mutants, because we've been talking for a while and we're barely on to issue like 7.
I told my producer and I told my editor, I was like, listen, you guys are worried about us talking before the show, talking about stuff that we're not going to have. I guarantee you, with how long this has been a part of my life, I'm going to have a lot to talk about, because we haven't even gotten past issue 7 yet.
Yeah. So and Nova Roma's coming up. Do we want to cut this episode at Nova Roma, or do we want to do it right before Nova Roma?
I say we're
coming up on an hour.
Yeah, you're right. Nova Roma starts at issue 9.
Issue 8.
Issue 8. You're right.
Issue 8's when they're like on the river and get captured.
Well, there's some stuff with Nova Roma I really want to talk about before we finish up here. And I know we got a lot.
We can start talking about Nova Roma, but yeah, let's.
Yeah.
So a 3-part miniseries.
Right. We'll talk about New Mutants. We got a lot to talk about. I felt that Karma's removal was abrupt, and it felt like she was gone forever. And it was forever, because when you're a kid, 2 years might as well be a lifetime.
Yeah, that's exactly a considerably larger fraction of your life.
Yeah, because in issue 6, she's gone. And by issue 7, most of the kids have just largely stopped talking about her. You know, there's some fallout, of course. Berto is the last remnant of it. But once, Xavier says, you just have to accept that she's gone, that's pretty much it. You don't really hear from Karma again until issue 31, 2 years later. And
it's really frustrating.
It turns out that the entity involved in this whole thing is the Shadow King. This is basically the very, very earliest appearance of the Shadow King.
Well, he first shows up in pretty early and Uncanny, but then he's kind of gone for a while.
Yeah, but he first really shows up as Shan in issue 31, and you see what he has done to her body by possessing it. But you hear his voice in issue 6, and you see Xavier talking about a psionic entity or something is there, and then it's just gone. But that's Amal Farouk. That's the Shadow King.
And that, again, New Mutants being so tied into what Claremont was doing on X-Men, because that's just one of the many seeds you have building up towards Shadow King as the final boss of his X-Men run in the Muir Island saga, which is phenomenal. One of my all-time favorite X-Men stories.
So, I guess that has happened. Basically, we've had our dramatic explosion, because at the end of the Viper and Silver Samurai arc, the castle or place that they're in explodes, and you find out that all the kids basically fell into the water. And like in the next issue, you see in a flashback that Sunspot actually sees Karma falling with them into the water, and then never sees her again. And this gives him flashbacks to the death of his girlfriend when he first got his powers, which is something we haven't actually talked about. Sunspot's powers actually kicked in the middle of a soccer game in Brazil. And, he basically flared up. And during his storyline, Hellfire Club agents shot at him, and his girlfriend did the hero thing and jumped in front of it, and she died. So that's the reason why Berto's taken this the hardest, because he's lost somebody just recently. So death is really fresh for him. And now he feels like that he's having to let go of Shan too, because he's not really sure what happened to her.
Yeah. Again, I keep hammering this home, but they do so much character work in these early issues and really making the kids feel fully fleshed out as individuals. And Berto's struggles with his family, with loss, especially as a kid. He's 14 in these issues?
He's the ages are Rain is 14, Berto is 15, Moonstar is 17, Cannonball is 18, and Shan is 19.
Yeah. Okay, so he's still incredibly young to be dealing with all the stuff that goes with being an X-Man in training.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to that in number 7 when they go to Brazil to visit his family. He's reunited with his mother, who is an archaeologist, And his dad, who is a pretty big shot businessman who rose from essentially being a slave, they bring it up multiple times that he was a servant as a child and routinely beaten until he was able to rise in his socioeconomic stature, and is now like a multimillionaire in Brazil, smoking stogies and making deals with the Hellfire Club. And there they are again. The Hellfire Club are all over this run.
Yeah, he is exceedingly rich, and this particular fact is still even apparent now today, as Berto is obviously in Hawks and Pox, House of X, Powers of X, with his New Mutants team, and a lot of the stuff he talks about is the fact that I'm incredibly rich.
Yeah,
and he likes to solve a lot of his problems with money.
I don't know.
Usually hilarious.
I do not know when his dad passed away, but clearly he inherited quite a bit from him.
Yeah. I forget when his dad passed away too, because it was during issues I wasn't paying attention to, which I actually found out that this brought back a lot of memories because I was buying these issues from gas stations when they came out, and I remember a kid from middle school showed me Marvel graphic novel #4, and I was like, "Holy crap! I have to have that." And when he showed it to me, New Mutants #1 came out. So I got that. And I got #2. And then for whatever reason, I did not get 3, 4, 5. It wasn't until 6 that I got brought back in. So as I'm rereading these issues now, I'm reading issues I've never seen before. And I did not realize I didn't read them until this week. So I was like, oh, crap, look at all this stuff. So it was eye-opening.
So I think the last section of the book we'll talk about tonight is #8, which is the start of the Nova Roma arc. And this is where another kind of big glaring problem I had with the book was.
I think I know what you're going to talk about. You talked about the white girls dressed up as
natives,
Havitos.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. So the overarching plot is that Berto's mom is going on a expedition, as she is wont to do, and she gets captured because Berto's dad is hiring mercenaries from the Hellfire Club to stop them from investigating this area of the Amazon for some reason. And meanwhile, as the New Mutants are fighting off the Mercs, they encounter a group of literal Amazonian women who attack them. And one of them, as she falls into the water, her brown skin and black hair washes off to reveal a blonde white girl. And this is Amara, who becomes Magma in a couple issues later. But yeah, I was very taken aback by that sequence. I was like, oh, we doing this, huh? This is certainly a choice.
Back in the mid-'80s when this thing came out, that was not problematic. That was just disguise.
Yeah.
I mean, this day, obviously...
It might not have been seen as problematic, but it was still a less than great...
It wasn't largely looked upon as problematic, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Obviously, now people are much more.
We know better, or we should know better now.
Yeah, we're more aware of what this implies.
Yeah, the Aryan princess of Roman Empire colonials disguising herself as a native South American. Ain't great.
Specifically a Havito.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was
certainly a decision.
I was reading this. I was like, man, me and Gideon are going to be talking about this.
Yeah, Magma is such a weird character. I like Amara. They do a lot of interesting stuff with her in the next few issues. But we will be talking a whole lot about Nova Roma next week because, good Lord, Nova Roma they drop so much on you in these 4 issues and just expect you to kind of roll with it. But
yeah, it's not something that you can easily digest. When I was reading it, I was like, okay, we're just going to talk about the fact that, Amara is in Nova Roma and it introduces Selene and all this.
Yeah.
We're just going to move on. But
Nova
then
Roma
the issue just kept going and going. I was like,
We
okay.
do not have the time to talk about it enough tonight, but next week we're just gonna cut a promo on Nova Roma. that shit is insane.
Because this is actually the first appearance of long-standing X-Men villain, immortal mutant, energy vampire Selene.
Star of Dark Phoenix, Selene.
Yeah.
If you had told me that Selene would be in the Dark Phoenix movie a few years ago, I'd have been like, okay, yeah, if you don't want to use Emma, why not use the Black Queen? But then you tell me she's basically a Skrull stand-in.
Yeah.
Bonkers choices with Selene through the years.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when we're talking about Skrull stand-ins, I'm watching season 3 of Runaways, and there's a member of Runaways that's supposed to be a Skrull.
Oh, do they bring her into the show?
She's in the show. She has her abilities, but she's not a Skrull.
Yeah, legally distinct from a Skrull.
Yeah, she's a shape-changing alien, but not a Skrull.
I'm sorry if I've seemed distracted in video. The cat was demanding my attention, so I had to.
And you must pay attention to that. I miss my cat, even though I know he's across the street.
I guess with that, we've pretty well covered the opening arcs of New Mutants, and my biggest takeaway from the book is just the incredible character work that Claremont, McLeod, and Buscema do throughout these opening 8 issues. You really get a sense of them as people right off the bat. None of them come off as just like 2D cutouts or stereotypes. There's a lot going on with all of their backstories. Like Cannonball particularly could have been really easily just written off as a generic hick, but all of the stuff with his family and his father passing away and his work in the mine really adds up. And particularly, I think one of the most interesting character things that Claremont does is root the characters' inner development with the development of their powers. Because throughout it, you see them get a better, finer control over it. Moonstar starts off only being able to bring up people's greatest fears. By the end of these 8 issues, she's able to pull out pretty much anything she wants with like some limits, but she's able to do people's greatest desires. She's able to do images that she specifically chooses. You have Cannonball. I think it's by this point he's figured out how to bank. Like I think it's either right before or right after Nova Roma he figures out how to turn. That's like a huge moment for him.
It's right before Nova Roma where he finally turns.
Yeah.
Because by the time Nova Roma is going on, he's now weaving through trees easy.
Yes.
And just a footnote about how progressive for the time this book really was. When X-Men first came out back in 1964, I want to say, it was 4 men, 1 girl. They were teenagers. Now with the New Mutants, for probably the first time ever, the girls outnumbered the guys.
Yeah.
New Mutants team basically consisted of only 2 male characters and 3 female characters. And when they lost Karma, they replaced her with another girl. And after that was done, they brought in another girl.
Yeah, and the ethnic diversity of the team also is really well done. They all feel like, again, they're not just cardboard cutouts or stereotypes. They all feel like fully formed people. And one thing that I always kind of applauded X-Men for is I think it does a really good job by its Native American characters. And Danny Moonstar is no exception. She is a phenomenally realized character. Again, she is essentially the lead of these opening issues.
And there's absolutely no doubt what she is. She very much identifies with her tribal background. It's the first Cheyenne character I had ever seen portrayed in a comic book.
Yeah, like when you go outside of X-Men in terms of Native American superheroes, you have Apache Chief, who is a less than ideal take.
Yeah, and
but in the X-Men, you have Danny Moonstar, you've got Thunderbird, you have Warpath, you have Forge, one of possibly my favorite Native American superhero.
Yeah, Forge is Sioux, if I'm not mistaken, and T-Bird and Warpath are Apache.
Yes. And, oh boy, we're going to come back to T-Bird and Not the next episode, but the episode after when we wrap up the coverage of these issues. And we were fools to think we could cover 17 Claremont issues in less than an hour and a half. Because these issues are dense as hell. I think a lot of our other book club ones, we've done a pretty good job of getting you the gist of the book. These ones we really had to breeze through, and we're still not through all of our intention for it.
You're reading my mind, man. I'm thinking the exact same thing you're talking about. When we were doing Mr. Miracle, I was just doing this. Okay. And when I was rereading this, I'm like, crap, I got a lot to dig through.
Yeah. Last year I did a whole read of Claremont's X-Men, and so I was used to his incredibly dense prose style, and just diving back into these, I was like, man, we really bit off more than we can chew, because we didn't even touch on what the individual adventures were up until like the X-Men come back. And those stories, they're great. They're really good character defining stories. But when we're trying to present New Mutants as an arc, obviously they're going to fall by the wayside. So don't feel like you don't need to read these stories after watching this episode. Like, I think this is the best actually example of what we've been wanting to do with these is outreach and getting people to read these classic stories.
Yeah, because we really haven't talked about the Sentinels that popped up in issue 2 and 3, and the fact that Project Wide Awake and Henry Peter Gyrick is involved in this, and his weird ass super nationalism, xenophobia, when he realizes that all the members of the New Mutants are from different countries all over the world, and just how worried he gets, that these mutants are all coming from all over the world now. Well, how do we defend against them? It's like,
Henry Peter Gyrick.
You are just so many things wrong with you.
My all-time favorite Gyrick story is from Chris Priest's Black Panther, where he's showing up to do his normal government stooge thing and report on Wakanda. And so T'Challa gets challenged by M'Baku. And so T'Challa is like, wouldn't you rather face an envoy of a far more important nation on the global stage like Henry Peter Gyrick? So you get an issue of M'Baku in his mech gorilla suit just slapping around Gyrick, and it's very satisfying.
Henry Peter Gyrick is basically one of those, you know what? I'm going to coin a phrase, an anti-villain. He is like J. Jonah Jameson. They're frequently antagonists so much so that they're usually the most antagonizing character of that issue, whether they be hiring the Scorpion or greenlighting Sentinels to be sent out. But for all intents and purposes, though, when it really comes down to it, these two characters mean well, and they do have a sense of integrity and honor, and there are stories that harp on that.
They're just assholes.
They're just assholes. And that's what Henry Peter Gyrick doesn't hate the people he deals with. He just will not give them what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't let shit slide.
Yeah. He's the poor bastard tasked with overseeing metahuman affairs in the United States, a country that has a grossly large percentage of metahumans in the world.
Yeah, and then he gets thrust into Project Wide Awake, which I believe is like the government's attempt to monitor and control the American superhuman activity, and also Sentinels.
Yeah, he's neck deep in those in this book.
Yeah.
So I think that'll wrap it up for this week. Next week we will talk about New Mutants 9 through 17. And that'll knock out the Claremont, McCloud, and Buscema era. And then the week after that, we will take on issues. Hopefully we can get through 18 through 31. I think that's a bit more realistic than knocking out 17 issues in one night.
Oh, Sankovich, I don't know, man. I read that issue again. It's beautiful. It's like looking at a stained glass window. That should remain a stained glass. Oh, Kitty! I must.
Olivia is very disappointed that you don't love Bill Sienkiewicz.
Well, cats are very opinionated when it comes to comic book art.
It's true. So I think I'll let you take us out, Mr.
Yes,
Mr. Johnson.
indeed. Check us out on the various forms of social media that we have out there. We are on the gram. We put our images up there, or at least we're trying to. I will admit that I have not posted in the past couple episodes. That being said, I'm going to go do that tonight. So we'll update. If you see like an image that's popped up in one of our episodes, you're like, hey, I want that. I'm going to put it in there. You can grab it. It's yours. Knock yourself out. We're also on a Patreon. We have a Patreon, which of course our long lost missing episode is on there in its audio only format. I know that we got other projects that we're kind of lining up for that, and now that we're getting a little long in the tooth with this being our 31st episode, we're going to start doing our side projects we've been promising to do, and of course probably even Patreon exclusive content will show up there.
Fancy.
I know. You can follow my own stuff on facebook.com/mycomicbookfacts, where I talk about characters that have popped up in movies and TV shows, and I explain the comic origins of these characters to your average reader. Let's see what else we got going on here. What medias are we on? Am I missing anything, Gideon?
It sounds like you pretty well covered it.
Yeah, I always kind of bumble into this line going, am I covering all the aspects? Am I doing everything? Do we have
I'd say I was petting Olivia, so I might have missed recommending people subscribe to us on their podcasting platform of their choice, or even YouTube, hitting that bell and getting them notifications whenever we do a new episode, which is generally going to be every Tuesday, but who knows? We might have additional days for you.
Yeah, we're not really sure. We're still kind of discussing back and forth this format we've got going on. I know down here in Texas is where we're recording it. Our good governor Abbott says it's all nice and safe and we should go wander around. But us being smart individuals and realizing that's not the smartest thing you should probably do, we're going to continue on with our at-home episodes until it's the responsible. We're going to be responsible adults, basically. We're going to stay home until things with this this event that we're kind of going through become more controlled, more stable. Where, so basically, look forward to more episodes that look like this for the foreseeable future. I would love to get back to the studio. I miss hanging out with my producer and my editor instead of just staring at their Skype images as they read their phones. I do miss going down there as much as I love crossing traffic during rush hour here in San Antonio to get over to the studio. If you've got ideas where we can actually do something new with this format, something maybe that hasn't been done with our previous episodes, let us know. I'm always willing to try new things. And since this does seem to be a format that we're doing for the foreseeable future, I wouldn't mind trying something new. We might try bringing people on in certain episodes for whatever reason. I'm kind of babbling at this point. I think at this point, we're just going to see ourselves off, and we'll see you next week.